Hello, this is day 10. All right. I think I might have it all ready to go. Also, I found the pop filter. I want to move it down to like get it out of. Let's see if I can do this right. There, I think that's right. The pink thing's still kind of fun. Before I added the white one, I was thinking like, oh, maybe that would be more subtle, but I can still see it. It's like right in my face. And so maybe I'll just try to go get a black one. Or I don't know. This is much better. To wear the headphones because then if I'm like over here, then I can tell because I can only hear it in my head and I can't like hear it in my ears. So it really helps to tell whether you're like off or on mic. But yeah, I've got another mic without the pop. Anyway, let's just do this thing. Where am I at? Let me just do it at like 1 minute just so I can time it. So something like now. All right. So Linux is microprocessors, predecessors. No. So I've skipped. Okay, we're going to start the timer again. But I messed up this one a few times. No, I guess I got to do it. All right, fine, fuck it. I was trying to think like as an alternative, a different way, but I don't think so. Like I guess I got micro. Maybe to have fun, I can put a hyphen in there because I see micro and I want to say microprocessor. But if I do micro hyphen computer, that could be, then do a refresh here. That could potentially be, yeah, and it looks nicer. It looks cool. I like it. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do from now on. Where are we at? Okay, let's just pretend this is at 2 minutes, even though it's 2:06. All right, Linux is a microcomputer predecessors, and I want to say processors again. Yeah. Hyphenate that one too. Linux has microcomputers predecessors pre-19. I find that hilarious. I shouldn't. I shouldn't. But I think it's silly. Pred. All right, fine. Fuck it. That's what it's going to be. Just for fun. I mean, if I'm laughing at it, why not? Linux and its microcomputer predecessors, pre-1996, otherwise known as Y Linux. All right. But first, I really value the accuracy. So if you find any mistakes, you can go correct me here. I promise to leave this URL live until at least 2034. Oh, you can. If you find any mistakes, I built something for you to correct me. I built something for you to correct me here. I promise to leave this URL live until at least 2034. Right. This is a general talk, so here are some players for our 20th century journey if you haven't met them before. The present, chapter 1. We all use Linux, even if we don't know it. Whenever you see a machine reboot at a grocery store or an airport, it's like, oh, hey, there's that penguin again. Linux has arguably become the most ubiquitous operating system. How did that happen? This is a story that's usually given. Now, I need to say this thing here. A 21-year-old or a college in undergrad in Finland posted about his hobby project on the internet, and a bunch of people helped him. An undergrad in Finland posted about his hobby project on the internet, and a bunch of people helped him. The rest is history. Wait, a college kid with a hobby project starting a computer revolution by posting? That's absurd. What about all these other things that existed before? These are only the Unixish ones. Oberon by Pascal's progenitor Nicholas Wirth is from 1987, and there were other more minor ones. I found references I found in the back of magazines. and long forgot I found in yeah, and long forgotten Usenet posts. They didn't even make my slide deck. But these did. Here's various commercial efforts. Some of these are complete systems, others are just kernels, such as Mock. The point is, it wasn't Linux shouting out from the wilderness. There was an active and vibrant Unix on the PC ecosystem and underground that predated him substantially, an industry which hasn't had lasting impact. Products such as Xenix and Coherent were hot stuff at one time, and now are basically the works of Ozymandias. Look on the timeline, ye mighty, and despair. I want that one. Look on the timeline, ye mighty, and despair. It's because this guy and his pet project, Genghis Khan the Unix War, not only on the microcomputers, but on all classes of computers. I could only find one commercial Unix still around, except for the special case of Apple, Zinnias' UnixWare 7 Definitive 2018, which last release was actually 2017. It looks like it can still be purchased, and that's it. Sitting like a Basque isolate at the foot of the Pyrenees. It's deader than dial-up. But Mr. Mackenzie, there's more to the story. What about the BSD lawsuit? Well, what about it? BSD has a history stretching back to the mid-1970s. I say mid-70s here, mid-1970s. Mid-1070s. Yeah, the Battle of Hastings. The two relevant BSD names for our stories are husband and wife team, Bill and Lynn Gillitz. Why didn't that win this theoretic... why didn't that win the Unix war? Well, this is usually given, but I'm not persuaded. BSD is much older, and in an interview with Bill Gillitz in 1984, he says he started working on 386 BSD when the 386 came out in 1986. Besides, there were 5 big lawsuits that held up Linux in court for over a decade. Did that really affect the velocity or development of Linux? If we took this at face value, that there was a 2-year hold in BSD, we should go over to, say, Usenet and see a fair amount of silence during the lawsuit period. However, we do not. This is just a small snapshot of activity. It was lively and vibrant. Period. This is only over the course of 2 days. Some of the authors had political statements in their SIGs against the lawsuit, but there's no evidence of any chilling effect. The highlighted post is an update on the lawsuit, amidst a bunch of articles talking about progress and bugs. I mapped out the velocity of 386 BSD using the articles and tried to see if there was any noticeable decrease or change in the correlated with the court case's activities, and although I'm not a data scientist, the two looked completely unrelated. Lastly, there's a number of articles across Usenet with titles like Linux or 386 BSD, where people list out the comparisons on which one they should choose. Although many include minutiae such as specific hardware and protocols, none had a reference to the lawsuit as a reason to choose. So I have to be forced to reject this hypothesis. It's often given, but there is no contemporaneous evidence to support it. If you want to tell me how wrong I am, go to the URL. And denounce me at your leisure. Regardless, Linux has become at least an order of magnitude more prevalent than BSD. Why is that? The first... Oh, I need to do that. Yeah, this keeps getting in my way. Let's try to go around. This is also possible. Hey, it's out of my fingers. I present 2 possibilities. The first is a 19th century approach to history called the Great Man Theory, and the second is a latter 20th century approach called social history. And it's way more difficult. Let's try the first theory. That sounds really easy. It isn't actually a useful framework unless you've got a bad habit of sulking about things you consider flops. It said some great and glorious thing happened, but you can't do it because you don't have the right genes. I guess this is okay if you aren't ambitious, but you're all rock stars, right? So I guess we'll have to look at the second one. Using the power of syllogisms, mere mortals did this. We are mere mortals, therefore we can do this. But only if we understand it. I'm going to take the Socrates reference out there. That's a hidden joke. Fine. There's lots of hidden jokes in here. Okay. Let's do. Okay, fine. Let's do 2. Number 1 is a much shorter speech. There's an 1840s book by Thomas Carlyle. I'm liking this one less and less. Titled "On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroics of History," positing great men should rule and others should revere them. Presenting a Horatio Alger story. I could just repurpose that and make a fawning biopic. However, we have a much harder task ahead of us. The posits. And to do that, we must have some defendable, falsifiable, maybe even testable hypotheses. But first, here's some more jargon. Perhaps Linux was the second act of the personal computer revolution. Personal software on personal hardware. If the central will not hold, things fall apart, and mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, we might as well make it productive and get a nice operating system out of it. Maybe a free Unix needed a large pool of hackers to build it on the cheap computers with a robust way to contact each other and avoid bad actors taking advantage of others' generosity. Maybe. There's also the maybe nots. This is part of the falsifiable thing. Oh yeah. There's also the maybe nots. That falsifiable thing I talked about. Here's 2 major ones. Unix was thought to be really complicated. When talking about the elegance of Unix, there were mentions of how it was only about 10,000 lines of code, created mostly by 2 people. Even 386 BSD 20 years later was done by the Jolitzes, the husband and wife team. Community-based programs were thought impossible. There's an organization called Share that was started in 1955 who came up with something called the Share operating system in the late 50s, which was community developed, where people would share the source code. This was, however, structured closer to a buyer's cooperative. To see how Share worked early on, let's go to Computer World, January 1968. During the past 4 months, the Share DOS-TOS project has been working with IBM to define changes needed by users. The project defined the changes that which they... I'm going to drop that. To define changes by users and presented them to the corporation. Done. And presented them to the corporation. When the company responded, it was found that 12 out of 13 of the requests has been turned down. So this power dynamic was more convivial. Oh yeah, Share was based out of Los Angeles, so LA Pride, I guess. Speaking of things that happened before I was born. This is ancient history. Although Unix started in 1969, the first Unix paper was 1974. I've extracted 4 principles from it that will be useful for our journey. Leverage, don't invent. Doing beats programming. Needs, not desires. Use early, use often. Although each one may have its flaws, together they form a cohesion, even a synergy, if you will. Unix was designed for classic computers that died out in the 1980s called mini-computers. They were about an order of magnitude cheaper than... They were about an order of magnitude... They're about an order of magnitude or 2 cheaper than mainframes. I like that, but I stumble over it. They were about an order of magnitude... comma, that's why. They were about an order of magnitude or 2 cheaper than mainframes, and also less capable. Well, at first. People wanted to solve their mainframe tasks on cheaper machines. Because that might have been all they had access to. You see, roughly every decade, a new lower-priced computer class forms based on a new programming platform, network, and interface, resulting in new usage and the establishment of a new industry. That's called Bell's Law, and it's from 1972. As mini computers came on the market and became more powerful, Unix was there to leverage the increasing capabilities of the machines in order to service people's needs. These new machines provide a new context for new software. These needs are only meant as examples. The point is that velocity of computer progress went faster than people's needs. You could say that it looks like that computer performance increases as you could say that it looks like computer performance increases or increased at a square of the cost, and that transistors per chip doubled every 18 months. Those are called Grosh's law and Moore's law. Together, it meant the industry eventually ate itself through a multi-decade-long digestion. However, when new things come in, they are rough. They are rough. And like explorers, the people who get there early don't get there easy. It's okay, though. Some of us are crazy like that. And some of us are crazy and prefer it this way. Yeah, some of us are crazy and prefer it this way. It's okay, though. Some of us are crazy and prefer it. ATT was under a lot of legal restrictions, which I don't have time to get into, but because of that, Unix was initially distributed as if it came out of the back of an unmarked white van. Was initially distributed as if yeah, that's good. The chart on the right was part of the standard presentation deck for early Unix saying you're on your own. For early Unix. Was part of the standard presentation deck for early Unix. That's fine. Think of the adventure, the excitement. Who are you catering to with such a message? And what will be their behavior of those new recruits? What will the behavior of those new recruits guide the Nation Project? Oh, where? Who are you catering to with such a message? Who are you catering to with such a message? Where will the behavior of those new recruits guide the Nation Project? It's not necessarily about welcoming everybody. The most welcoming bar is probably not open for people to do weightlifting or assemble robots. With any of these efforts, you have to ask yourself who you're bringing to the door and what kind of establishment you're building. To the door. I like that one better. For example, from Linus Torvalds, October 5th, or October 1991. You also need to be something of a hacker to set it up. So for those hoping for an alternative to Minix 386, please ignore me. It is currently meant for hackers interested in operating systems and 386 with access to Minix. Maintaining focus is about intentionally, not incidentally, but actually intentionally choosing what to ignore. Actually, intentionally choosing what to ignore. You have to be a clear signal amongst our noisy world. I'm stumbling over a lot tonight, and I don't know if I'm just scrutinizing it too much. You have to be a clear signal. Anyway, because you had to know what you were doing. Unix was initially introduced through engineering and technical people and not through the conventional decision makers, but it worked, and eventually by the 1980s, Unix was mainstream. So it's a success. It looks like we won, but not so fast. As both consumers and the producers of Unix multiplied, the suppliers not only differentiated themselves, but succumbed to all the trappings of usual competitive markets. Marxist economies talk about this generally as enclosing the commons, trying to take ownership of groups and commonly held things and set up barriers and frictions so you don't lose the customers by intentionally creating lock-ins or making data portability more difficult. Not only did Unix own the mini-computer market, but it infected everything from workstations to mainframes. Unisys, one of the mainframe makers, had an article in September 1987 issue of Computer World predicting a tripling of Unix sales over a single year. The problem with all this analysis goes back to the chart with the various blobs around computer classes. The threat is almost always coming from below. In this case, it was Microsoft and microcomputers. Yes, micro-computers. And not, say, Nixdorf Cynix on an NS32000 versus Clix on an Intergraph Inter-Pro. In 1985, Microsoft argued that their Xenix Unix would be a multi-user version of DOS, and Bomber in 1987, I could just say in 1987, I don't have to do Bomber. And in 1987 said they didn't see it competing with their plans for OS2, which at that time was seen as a successor to Windows 1.0. I know things changed, specifically in December of 1987 with Windows 2.0. Specifically that December. I know things changed, specifically that December with the introduction of Windows 2.0, but that's Microsoft for you. Anyway, in 1985, Microsoft was quoted as saying there were over 100,000 Xenix installs. At the time, it required 12 360K floppies, which was seen as bonkers. Putting that into perspective, in case you're even younger than me, a 32 gigabyte $5 micro SD card is about 93,000 floppies, 190 meters stacked end to end. That's like a 2.5 minute walk. All that storage is now the size of your thumbnail and costs as much as a taco on the west side. By the way, this quote up here, I don't know if I want to do that. Let me move it over. I mean, that quote here is a tribute to Franz Kafka, but I became suspicious as it was a hanging quote and not saying where it was from, so I downloaded all of his work. We can do that now. Some of it's in German. We can do that too. Look through all of it. Nothing. Earliest attribution I found. No, see, it ruins the flow. It ruins the flow. I did do all of that, by the way. I saw this as being Franz Kafka, and I was like, okay, where? I want to be thorough, and it's not. It doesn't exist. Anyway, software distribution used to suck. Speaking of Microsoft, oops, I have to go up here to do that. Speaking of Microsoft, that punch taped is how they distributed BASIC for the Altair in the 1970s. Paul Allen, can you do a strikeout? Is that a possible thing? Does that exist here? No, that's too fancy, isn't it? I have all these other things, but I don't have strikeout. Back in the day, that used to be Control S. No, that they don't do it. All right. Speaking of Microsoft, that punch tape is how they distributed BASIC for the Altair in the 1970s. Paul Allen made a loader as he flew to MITS to demo it by using a hole puncher on the punch tape on the plane. Really. By using a hole puncher, comma, on the punch taped, comma, on the plane. Really. He had no idea if any of it was going to work, since even their BASIC had been written on an emulator he and Bill made by reading some manuals. On an emulator made by reading manuals. The tape took about 20 minutes to load. When he got to MITS. And of course, it wasn't then stored on disk because the Altair didn't have one. Just keep the computer on, I guess, if you want to use the software. It's also worth noting the lower right. That's called a type-in program. Software used to be distributed this way, not only in languages such as BASIC, but also as multiple pages of hexadecimal listings using built-in checksums to catch mistakes. I'm serious. No, I'm serious. They published the listings like this every month for years. You typed it in. There was no electronic reader. You can see some of the basic code from the first page, and it's not pretty either. Oh yeah, that QR code is in the actual. That QR code is this actual game running on an emulator on your browser. You can scan it and just tap it on your phone. No typing required. Anyone want to scan it and give it a try? I'll leave it up for a few seconds. I don't need to do software distribution. Used to suck again. You could only use the software you had access to. I can do that as the previous one, as the transition. And say, so let me try that again. Anyone want to scan and give it a try? Leave it up for a few seconds. You could only use the software that you have access to. For many people, that meant retail or mail order channels. You could also copy a floppy from a friend. The bottom two methods had consumer overhead. For dial-up, you usually had to pay an expensive phone bill, and for internet, you probably didn't have it. That means most people were only exposed to the top three groups, and thus it was difficult for smaller developers, especially non-commercial ones, to get their software to the masses. Quoting Marketing High Technologies, Bill Davidow, 1986, it's not a product without a distribution channel, or in Linux's case, a distribution. The technology may have the potential to address the needs of many, but without specialists, redistributors, to put it in the hands of those customers, it will not succeed. Products are sold through distribution, not to distribution. I need to jump forward to the why Linux question here for a bit while this diagram is up. Linux had high accessibility of the install media. Not only were there websites that would mail you CDs for $1, yeah, well, $1, but you could find them at coffee shops, libraries, and attached to magazines at the grocery store. Filling up a CD with a Linux distribution, heavily with a Linux distro, and heavily cribbing a bunch of well-written how-tos was cheap content for a magazine producer who just wanted to get an issue out. But there were even more problems. Depending on the distribution channel, updates had different logistic complexity, especially when considering updates from outsiders. For instance, if you wanted to update, say, the retail version of Lotus 123 and have your changes appear on the shelf at Circuit City, you'd probably have to do it yourself and get arrested. It would have been fun, though. Once there were online networks which could provide this... Let me make that up. Once there were online networks which could provide the storage and communication necessary to unlock multiplayer online mode for the software development game, a new form of writing software was created. Yaki Benkler made up the term Commons-Based Peer Production in 2001 and wrote a book about it called The Wealth of Networks in 2006. Or let's go back to Linus Torvalds in 1991. I've enjoyed doing this. I've enjoyed doing it. And someone might enjoy looking at it and even modifying it for their own needs. It is still small enough to understand, use, and modify, and I'm looking forward to any comments you might have. I'd like to hear from you, so... I cut this one out, and... I'd like to hear from you so I can add your software to the system. Yeah, I'll just do that. So it's a longer code about Minix developers who wrote stuff for Minix so that he can cross-compile. I'll just do that. Anyway, I don't have the time to go over all that crap. Stallman had a Rooseveltian list of 4 software freedoms to find free software. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about horizontaling software development, or what I call adoptive development. Or what I call adoptive. Because it's not just license, it's organization plus license. Essentially, how easy is it for modifications to become integrated and in the same distribution channels, and others to become a distributor or share the product? Oh yeah, other people to become a distributor. You need not only a decent legal structure, but a software organization structure that affords this, and an open shop that permits anyone to come in. Eric Raymond touched on this in his seminal work, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. There is the Cathedral model, which is tall, and which source code is available with each software release, but the code developed between releases is restricted to an exclusive group of software developers. Contrast with the Bazaar model, which is flat, in which code is developed over the internet in view of the public. The vertical lines here, which go from permissive to... That's not true. Which go from... Oh. Which... See, when I say go, it makes it look like there. Which vertical lines here, which... It's really graduate. But people don't use graduate that way. You could say... not go, not graduate. What is it called? There's a term for it when you do, but it's called gradient. It's the same grad. Yeah, I can't use graduate. That's not how it's used in English. Just drop a word. Go, I guess. The vertical lines here from permissive to restrictive is a general continuum. That's it. You don't have to have anything there. Restrictive, comma, is a general continuum. Public domain is seen as too permissive in the eyes of GNU because you can relicense and reprivatize things for different purposes. I've also read that copyleft and GPL are different from each other, but I never went to law school, so I can't explain it. If you zoom in, you'll see non-computer things. I'll go over a few for people to get a sense of... This is. Bottom right corner is facts. People ought to be really hesitant to modify facts. And in the US, they are considered public domain. Above that, you have most religions. I can say, preach the good word and start up a congregation around. But at least in principle, the texts are sacred and inviolable. As we go up, we get jokes, recipes, human language, and at the top is folklore, which changes readily. Also at the top is Wikipedia, which anyone can edit. An interesting adoptive entry on the restrictive side is social media. Anyone can contribute, but the platforms retain a bunch of rights. Classic commercial software is all the way down here in the hesitant and restrictive camp. The pink stuff is all Linux related. If you're colorblind, it's these right here, and I'd actually point to them. Minix is down here next to freeware and GCC in the hesitant category, below the pool labeled Unixes. Remember, all of this is as of the early 1990s. This is in no way 2024 accurate. Speaking of the past, but Wikipedia's on there. Makes no sense. I should say. Except for social media and Wikipedia. All of this is early 1990s and not 2024 accurate. Yeah, you can't because you're right. Speaking of the past, let's go to the introduction of Minix. In 1986, commons-based peer production wasn't feasible. People didn't have the internet in their pockets like you do. Because of the prohibitive logistics around software distribution updates, especially customer-initiated, Minix was a cathedral. Also, it's worth noting that it was a product of Prentice Hall, who wanted to sell textbooks and course material. And course material for Andrew Tannenbaum, who was teaching pretty inexperienced undergrads. No, just leave it right there. You don't have to do that. And course material for Andrew Tannenbaum. So here's the relevant parts from the announcement. They are not It's not public domain. However, the publisher does not object to people making a limited number of copies for friends. This is SneakerNet. If you want to sell it, which is the two categories above SneakerNet, retail and mail order, you need permission. In the book, you will find postcards that you can use to order the software. That's your mail order again. And he says he doesn't want to copy a bunch of floppies, as in do SneakerNet, and then price it at $80, which was really cheap. Commercial x86 Unix, PC Unix generally started at $1,000 without the source. Now, I also mentioned that it was adjacent to GCC. What's up with that? I'd say GNU was also a cathedral. Here's an example from an early GNU bulletin, 1987. We can see it listing out different distribution channels, and then as they solicited funds to pay programmers to write more software, like a software engineering firm. I misspelled that, but I didn't catch it. They played a second role here as a provider of copyleft and eventually software under the GPL, which came out a few years later. Every bulletin had a growing list of software by others that you could order basically at cost. As far as this goes, there's precedents. Here's one from 1976 trying to be a repository for, at that time, public domain software from smaller producers such as Code publishers, such as Code published in, say, Dr. Dobbs' journal at the time. Some assembly programs ran over 40 pages long, which that you, of course, were expected to type in yourself. So people were looking for a more reasonable solution that didn't cost much, but not all the pieces were there yet. All of these things required labor, coordination, and resources, and how you chose to instrument those made some things more possible than others. Ideas are bizarre, even when their implementations are cathedrals. For instance, there were many graphical desktop microcomputers, um, computers, even though each one was a proprietary restrictive project. The superstructure of desktop computers operated in the adaptive space. Pretend we have a concept of a free operating system. We may not get all the parts right the first time, but the Platonic ideal exists. Well, kind of. It's as much a contemporaneous invention as anything else, as a pale, true thought suspended in our life stream. We can go back to Vannevar Bush's Memex article in The Atlantic in 1945 to see the spirit of what we now call many things. Unlike products, Platonic ideals are collective projects owned by nobody. They are permissive and adoptive, and not static abstractions divorced from human influence. They are ideas manifested from context. The map is not the territory, and in our industry, we are tasked with creating both through pure thought stuff. What a responsibility. We better organize. And so I go to the next one. This is about complexity of building software and not about electing people. You may have heard that commercial software began with Bill Gates' open letter to computer hobbyists in 1976 when he denounced sneakernet distribution of Altair Basic because he didn't get paid for each of the copies. That's not really when commercial software began. In the mid-50s, software was in-house coupled with hardware or contract-based, as you can see in this 1959 ad for a programmer from Punch Card Data Processing. But the version of commercial software that had already built stuff you purchased copies of for a computer you had already owned came about quickly. Has existed since at least 1960. No, really, there's another falsifiable thing that I want to go through. Go over. Bruce Perrin's chapter in Open Sources, Stephen Levy in Hackers, they allude to this Garden of Eden in the past from which we have fallen, where all software was once free. Really? Well, no. Here, 1966 claimed commercial software was a $100 million industry. And then in 1969, 11 companies worth at least $100 million each got together to fight off for not-for-profit efforts. $1969. The manufacturers bundled software to lock in their customers like Microsoft did with the Internet Explorer. It was as free as Windows on a laptop you buy. People were trying to DRM and patent software back in the 1960s. Maybe there was some idyllic Valhalla in the bubble noise MIT artificial lab. But the real world was up to the same tricks as they are now. Anyway, debundling happened in 1968 and 69, vendor by vendor, and Unix arose from this primordial soup, and is one of the oldest non-mainframe software that is still recognizable today. I say recognizable because the family tree looks like a European dynasty. This is Unix timeline history chart. Covers a few years in the late 80s. If you were to zoom in, you'd see Minix, GNU, Trix, SunOS, the Mach microkernel Xenix from the House of Free Software, AT&T, or the Kingdom of Microsoft. I'm still not a lawyer, but this is really complicated. Not only do source and binaries have different terms, but sometimes only certain organizations had access to them. It actually gets crazier. Things had a sorted past. For instance, if you were an educational institution with a pre-existing AT&T license, then you had access to BSD. So a version might have multiple parents, each with a different term sheet. It's a legal Habsburg. That's why a few slides ago there's a puddle labeled Unixes. Even the Unix term itself is a confusing mess. Raise your hand if you still think it's copyrighted by AT&T. No. 30 years ago, AT&T sold the copyright to Novell, who then donated it to the Open Group, which is now a standards organization. Some Linuxes have had the Unix license. Some Linuxes have gone through that process, so Linux is now a Unix. Really, you're just finding it out right now. This stuff is absurd. We need something with clean, documented history, a single license that... A clean, documented history and easy answers to these problems. A clear license and easy answers to all these problems. So Linux and effectively all modern open source projects have this solved. All development is open. The history is well archived. And GPL solves this family tree problem. I should say there's an open source license organization. Open source license organization. And it's yes, and OSI approved licenses. Yeah. The history is well archived, and OSI-approved licenses solve the family tree problems. This structure that's now ubiquitous also solves the unknown unknowns and arguably is one of Linux's primary contributions. Also, lastly, let's talk about the internal politics of building software. In the abstract penguin slide, we cover the outside aspirational curve, where things take decades and opinions are strong and many. Some things, like paradigmatic ways of doing open source development, things like paradigmatic ways of doing open source development took 20 years to become dominant. Because the longevity and applicability of the more abstract solutions is also on the same time frame as their implementations. But within that exists lower level Maslowian motivations. And keeping things there makes them more actionable. Let's say a bug report. Let's say my network card isn't sending out packets. We can say this bug is known, agreed upon, and demonstrable. So although it may not be easy, the labor path is, I wouldn't say known. I would say walkable, traversable. So although it may not be easy, the labor path is traversable. Now a new network card comes out, say in NE2000. I need it to work on Linux. That's a need. I can mostly demonstrate and come. Now that's a need. I can mostly demonstrate. I don't like that. I can demonstrate and come to agreement on what that would look like. Now I pretend I want to do something it wasn't designed to do. That's harder to demonstrate and agree upon. My job to get that actionable is to put. No. To get that actionable, I need to pull the desire into the lower curve so that a development cycle can encompass it. It's worth noting the Tannenbaum-Torvalds debate from 1992 to illustrate this. Tannenbaum chastised Torvalds' approach because it wasn't a microkernel, and he was focused. And Torvalds and Linux was exclusive to the 386. Really, Linux was in these lower curves, and Tannenbaum was trying to pull it up to the higher curves where things move far slower. GNU Hurd was a microkernel approach. I don't have to say mock. Stallman claimed that's why it was taking so long. Stallman claimed in the mid-90s. That's why it was taking so long and wasn't very stable. And modern... Nah, I don't have to do that. The point is the higher level curves are unlikely to succeed except as superstructures of the lower level functions, in the same way that our asymmetric approach to Platonic ideals happens on the back of incrementally more appropriate implementations, which is why you can snake a line from 1950s IBM share organization to GitHub. Through the process of clarifying the aspirations, they get moved to the concrete because they become material needs and bug problems. The clarity of the present stands in both the triumph and the wreckage of the past. You don't necessarily need to know the history of a spoken language or any other system in order to use it effectively, but it doesn't hurt. If you understand the price of everything, you'll have the value of most. I found this article and this advertisement both from May 1990. Sun says they have, what do I have, 44 minutes. It's going to go way over. Sun says they have both a cheap $6,700 computer. Here's a PC at about 1/10 the cost, which is fine if you can do some of the same things. Historically, that answer had been no, but referring back to the charts with computing needs and computing classes, this dynamic was likely to change soon. The 386 also had many technical features that made it more appropriate for Unix-style operating systems. There's an adage about this: "What Andy Grove giveth, Bill Gates take it away." In this case, the new software was Linux, and it was consuming the increase in capabilities provided by the 386. But that's not the only kind of price there is. There's also the price of time, which spent a lot on drawing these damn charts. This is a conceptual, not a quantitative graph. Essentially, Windows is the easiest to get up and going, but let's say you want to do something like a simple batch convert of a bunch of files, sort the contents, pick a field, extract the values, do some operation on them. These things get hard fast on Windows. Early on, 386, BSD, and its cousins were a pain to set up, but they had networking before Linux. It was a more sophisticated project. However, there were fewer people working on it, and they tended to be more experienced, so they were busy and expensive. Linux was mostly students, which are famously cheap. It was also heavily hobbyist-oriented, which usually meant the systems were more hackable, while the other Unixes, they presumed you had something important to do. Computer scientist Calvin Moore spoke to this in 1959. Paraphrased by, I want to fix this fucking font. Paraphrased by Pemberton. The more difficult and time-consuming it is for a customer to use it. Oh. I'm going to say that. Take the quotes out. That's Calvin Moore's 1959. As the complexity of the problems become more intractable, the approachability of the lower levels internal of the system become increasingly important. And I want to do that, this, and then move this over to here. Torvalds and hackers in general tend to create what Alan Perlis tend to create Torvalds and hackers, I should say hackers. Hackers tend to create, tend to build worlds where everything is possible, but nothing of interest is easy. Alan Perlis called that the Turing tar pit in 1982. Pulling yourself out of the Turing tar pit from a capable to a usable system requires some engine to push it forward. Our wordy commons-based pure production model from before can also be seen as prosumer, a producer and a consumer put together. It's used often for social media, where you're consuming other consumers' productions. Here, our engine is problem-solution integration, which keeps us in the bugs needs development cycle. With the bizarre method of development, the changes reflected back quickly, which meant with our bizarre, the changes reflect back quickly, which means that new users have fewer problems with, I shouldn't have to use a passive voice, with their different hardware, so that for other people with, say, an NE2000 card, it would just work. But where do you find the people to do that? Well, you build armies, of course. Am I hitting? No, I still have 10 minutes. Large networks are important. Their utility can scale exponentially with the size of the network. The number of combinatorial subgroup participants from these larger collections grows more rapidly than the original utility of the groups that joined. That's Reed's Law from 2001. For example, my friend and I start using Linux. I have an NE2000 network card that doesn't work. Now I join the subgroup of people becoming a we that need this to work. This only becomes an engine if you have the right people to complete the cycle we talked about. The lowest level here are enthusiast developers and enthusiast developers and bug fixers, followed by the curious and hobbyists, and then the business needs and people like power plants or airports that can't have things fail. Arguably, one of the failings of the early BSDs is that they were too lopsided on higher steps and thus couldn't get the virtuous cycle moving with enough velocity. I analyzed email addresses from about 2.5 million Usenet posts over a 2-year period, and you can see that there were almost always more commercial emails, and you can see there were almost always more commercial emails for BSD and more educational ones for Linux. So even though their general trend was ascending the staircase, Linux had more torque from the bottom groups. I called this the Linuxist revolutionary theory. The hacker vanguard forms a coalition with the personal computer proletariat, and the business-oriented bourgeoisie becomes interested, and finally the prohibitively assiduous aristocracy is able to use it. There is one last type of price, and that is of expertise. Whether it's your own or you're fronting some cash, it's expensive. You could roughly assign a utility function as the capability divided by effort required. Expand, that is the expansion. Sometimes both capabilities and efforts increase over time. Blender, for instance, is highly capable software, but also takes a lot of expertise to use effectively. Many mobile and web applications, on the other hand, actually remove power user features over time to make the product require less effort while also making it less capable. Still, other software, APIs, and frameworks can have Fred Brooks' second system smell, a new version that's far more difficult to use and leads to inferior results, thus being an inversion of the graph and decreasing the utility of the product. Let's talk about the multiple arrows. In order to get a larger user base, you need a diversity of capabilities running a diversity of efforts. Linux was able to achieve this by outsourcing the actual packaging of the OS through distributions. This is another insight about the Bazaar software model. Since the entire structure is more flat and the structural organization barriers are mostly removed, as markets naturally subdivide and form, they can be quickly and readily addressed. Because we're doing social hierarchy, I'll use critical theorist Marcuse's idea of de-radicalization. What did it say? The dominant structures say markets subsume the novel. However, because in bazaars people can self-organize, they beat it to the punch and move faster than a market force, which is why open source decoupled structures are more dynamic and swift-footed than commercial approaches. Here's a chart from Innovator's Dilemma, describing different strategies that can be taken as technologies get better. You don't have to say over time. Of course they get better over time. There's no other else. Get better over the River Kwai. You can generally either push up market to higher end consumers, which are the top 2 steps of a stairs, or you can stay with your existing customers, which might be the lower steps. However, because of the horizontal development of Linux and the existence of distributions run by multiple organizations, it was able to do multiple strategies at once. Not only these, but any other ones that might have been left out of the graph. The packets, I could say. Let's do this one. No, fuck it. Just go. A few slides ago, we saw Linux has a horizontalist, bizarre approach to software internally. Let's look at the implications of this externally. This chart is taken from Andy Grove's 1995 text, Only Paranoid Survive, describing how the industry moved from one-stop shop verticals to horizontal structure. If we put this in the aspirational space, this can be viewed as part of the same decoupling superstructure as the mainframe vendors were doing in the late 1960s. The premise of this transition was a book called The Coming Computer Industry Shakeout by Stephen McClellan in 1984. Quoting, "As software gains ascendancy, a new world will arise to characterize the activities of the industry. The key words will no longer be customization, specialization, and market niche. The new world will be integration. All computer equipment will need to communicate. System integration Drop down. System integration will be the most sophisticated and difficult task computer companies will have to undertake." That quote being what? Yeah, that quote. That quote being 40 years old. That quote being 40 years old gives us the privilege of seeing what happened. Essentially, 4 strategies were developed to tackle this problem. The first is to impose on the other. On the vertical. The first is to impose on the vertical by claiming you're the standard, but in practice, only one player has the privilege of only one player can do that. So OS2 died. Apple took a different route by sticking with the vertical model and being its own vertical. Apple took a different route by being its own vertical, and Linux could only survive and push the wheel out from the tar pit if there were enough people to do it. Luckily, timing was on their side. When the internet was mostly accessed at universities, September annually brought in a flood of new people that had to be coached. However, in the early 1990s, as residential internet grew, the old guard termed As residential internet grew, the old guard termed 1993 as the Eternal September, the beginning of the mainstreaming of internet access. For this to happen, cheap ISPs and web servers needed to exist quickly to support users. It's important to note that Linux was prima facie hobbyist and personal use oriented at this time, even though Linux Journal has articles in '94 about it as a web server. And running ISP. It's important to know that Linux was prima facie hobbies and personal use oriented at this time. Linux Journal has articles in 1994 about as a web server running ISPs. However, 1994 tech, such as Linux getting started, unleashing the workstation in your PC, or plug and play Linux from 1993, were in the lower two steps of our staircase, hobbyist and personal. The early Slackware and SLS distributions of the time also didn't include web servers or tools to run a business. The first people on the subsequent use case steps don't get there with clean off-the-shelf solutions. They play the scout role, clearing the road for the army to roll in, which is how the web server book in 1995, which is why the web server book in 1995 now includes Linux. Another benefactor of the Eternal September is attributed to Linus's law. Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Let's look at the various eyeballs. You know, I know I'm going over, but I'm wondering if I could actually get this thing down into an hour without all these breaks. In the first terms slide, I said that Linux was mostly built by college kids, and here's some evidence. We can see that after the first posting in October of 1991, Linus got from his friend. But then by November, he had a contributions from a Hong Kong University student, Theodore So from MIT. No, just do. But then by November, he had contributions from a Hong Kong University student, MIT, and University of Utah. In December, contributions came from Calgary and Berkeley. And then Colorado and Maryland University students contributed in January. So far, everyone is under 25, as I said before. There became an increasingly pressing need for a solution like And as I said before, there became an increasingly pressing need for a solution like Linux. To new problems. And those needs more or less persist to this day. Apple is vertical, Microsoft is entitled, and Linux continues to climb stairs that have yet to be drawn. Here's a nice quote by Torvalds. It's worth reading. I think the timing was good. Even just a year earlier, I don't think it could have been done. A year later, somebody else would have done something similar. These two bottom charts, you can see how Linux is dominating a supercomputer and a web server market. How's everyone doing? I hope you're still awake. Yes, that's typed on this sheet, as is this. I know it's long, so let's have some fun. Yeah, keep it right there. If there was a storefront if there was a storefront named open source, what would be displayed in the windows? In fact, let's do some interactive theater. This one requires some of you to wake up. We are a group of people in 1985 trying to bring free software to the masses. Our marketing director just told us about something called a marketing mix with the 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion. In order to have a figurehead for the free software movement, we need to find a piece of free software that qualifies these conditions. It should be easier to try, acquire, and understand, and shouldn't have a high price of time, money, or expertise. I appreciate all the suggestions so far. These are all excellent examples of free software. I especially like the elevator pitch for Emacs org mode. Before we settle on a project, I'm wondering if we've left anything off the list. Any suggestions from the audience? Oh, yes, you, sir, the man who I've known for 14 years. I'm going to get like somebody who I've actually known for about like a decade and a half to respond. And then he's going to say Linux. Said, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe Linux can be the window dressing of the free software movement. Oh, how about this? I have a better idea. Let's make an alt copyright pipeline. We have low effort things for curious PC users to try. Then we call them the principles in our community. Then we can tell them the beliefs that our community holds and get them to up their commitments. As they do, they'll become more familiar with projects and take more efforts. They'll become more familiar with projects which take effort and expertise. They may become involved or even an advocate for them. Over time, some of these people will aid us, if we're lucky, in reporting bugs, determining needs, and maybe even implementing desires to move our aspirational products forward and make it more tangible. In order to do this, we must be a welcoming community, by necessity, but also because we brought in the right people. So that's how it happened. Pause. So that's how it happened. Oh, wait a second. I forgot something. How do we do it again? Perhaps the final boss. Geoffrey Moore proposed this graph in his work Crossing the Chasm. It proposes that as commercial products mature, users with different behavior and expectations come around. There's 2 holes in this graph. The first group is people who are aspirational and have a high tolerance for impracticality. These are willing to go to the extra mile to make something work. There's a group that's enthusiastic about possibilities but want a lower effort, time, and expertise costs. In this graph on the right with electric car adoption in Norway, you can see that small slump, the first circle. The next group is the difficult one. They are looking for a working product and don't want to be hassled with inconvenience. That's a yellow circle in this group. Many products don't make it there. The last 2 are really the bandwagon and the holdouts. What am I at? Let's see if I can get it done on 115. Where am I at? Oh, yeah. Anyway, let's look at crossing the open source chasm. The first group here are the passionate hackers trying to claw at the aspirational curve and bring it down to the bugs and needs. If they can keep their passions going long enough and make sufficient progress, then perhaps the music makers will come around and help recruit more passionate people to enlarge that base. That's the first pipeline. If the engine between the passion and the enthusiast can be maintained in order to get to the problem-solution integration wheel, the project can get pulled out of the Turing carpet, and if the software capabilities divided by the effort demand yields enough of a utility ratio, then the pragmatists will become interested and the chasm is crossed. But it's important to keep the pipeline well lubricated because you'll be facing new challenges and use cases, and you'll need a few of those new users to slide along the responsibility graph in order to grow the coalition as Rees and Trout's law of division takes hold. Back when we talked about Platonic ideals being permeable, bizarre superstructures occupied by various executions, I said the clarity of the present stands on both the triumph and wreckage of the past. Sometimes for a city to become great, it must first be destroyed, so that a new generation can seize the dream and try to execute it better. Failures unbind us from commitments and give us permission to kill our darlings and do a page one rewrite by naturally creating a space for us to try again, but only if we retain the liberty to do so. So, strong IP enforcement on strong visions diminish the chance of success. You must let go of that which you love the most. You may get the vision right or the execution or timing or team right, but you're probably not all at once. Facebook, iPhone, Google, Amazon, they're all iterative executions of larger ideas owned by nobody. If you're working on a thing or have a dream and it's just you, then you're definitionally at the very left. We could argue that for certain use cases like Linux, that... You could argue that for certain use cases, Linux took over 20 years across the big chasm, and for some things, desktop publishing, digital audio workstation, photo editing, or social media, the free software chasm is still not crossed. There needs to be a certain kind of affection for the people, their needs, desires, and aspirations, for these to eventually succeed. For, say, the GIMP to overtake Photoshop. The commitment to others lower in the responsibility chart is key, because that's how you get the new recruits. So, whatever you're working on, it will take years and manifest differently than what you thought. You have to not have the codependencies with it. That will foster resentment, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Really, you'll probably become susceptible to the great man theory. If something is dying, maybe it's the fire you need to rebuild. Maybe that's the fire you need to rebuild things. Listen to the needs and desires of the idea. Do one thing and do it well. Work together. Handle text streams because that's a universal interface. This is actually Unix philosophy of Peter Salas, but I'm serious about it. Good software advice is also good people advice when building software. Let's go to the 1982 nonfiction Pulitzer Prize, nonfiction Pulitzer by Tracy Kadar, Soul of a New Machine. No. Let's do 1981. Let's go to Tracy Kadar, Soul of a New Machine. I don't have the time. Yeah. Looking into the VAX, West had imagined he saw a diagram of DEC's corporate organization. He felt that the VAX was too complicated. He did not like, for instance, the system by which various parts of the machine communicated with each other. There was much too much protocol involved. He decided that the VAX embodied flaws in DEC's corporate organizations. The machine expressed that phenomenally successful company's cautious, bureaucratic style. Churchill said, "We shape the buildings and thereafter they shape us." However, our buildings are different because the programmer, like the poet, works only slightly removed from pure thought stuff. He builds his castles in the air, from air, created by exertion of the imagination, or so says Fred Brooks. Regardless, wrecking balls for code are cheaper than those for concrete, so don't be afraid to use them. Here, Ritchie and Thompson's Unix philosophy. Here's Ritchie and Thompson's Unix philosophy. Here's another Unix philosophy. This time, think about it in terms of people. Make it easy to write, test, and run organizational efforts. Interactive use with humans instead of batch processing. Make do with smaller teams. You will need all of the engines I talked about to get over the chasms and move the projects forward. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of those organizations. Melvin Conway, Datamation, April 1967. We studied yesterday to create a better tomorrow. The future is ours to make. Probably. Okay, well. That was under. Gosh. There's a lot here. And I feel like that Micro Machines guy, right? A lot of these concepts, you have to chew on a bit in order to get past that. I'm wondering if I get to a point of not. I guess that what I'll have to do is, for the next few days, go over this. I'll get to a point where I'm not trying to edit it as I'm saying it, and prevaricating, and hopefully I'll get to a point where I can just time it out. And I think that it will probably be 52, 53 minutes. I'd really like to get it down to about 45. That's my goal. So that I can have the flexibility of pausing and not rushing. Yeah, anyway. Shirt tonight is Ubuntu. Yeah, I can turn it around even. Look at this. Let me see. In fact, I can just do this. Hold on. OBS. I've actually put this in my slide deck. I'll show you in a few seconds. You might have missed it. Yeah, you can see the logo. Anyway, all right. So let me go over a few things. So, it's probably been an hour and a half or so. So this one up here that I had a couple nights ago, and let me make this smaller again. And maybe move over. All right. So this one, I was talking about this as maybe like some kind of alt-right pipeline. I was like, oh, I can't. This is way too fucking confusing, right? So that's the one that I ended up doing like this. I'll show. Where is this one? So yeah, this is one this is how I ended up drawing it. And so yeah, OBS is right there along with Stable Diffusion. So there's some modern stuff in there. Yeah, it's like I think this gets it because it's a Yuga live Linux Live CD, which is the earliest one from 1993. I don't necessarily want to say that because I want to. I guess I could put Yuga in there. I don't know how relevant it is, and it does make it a little bit more busier than I want it to be. I'll try it out and I'll see what happens. This is something I just made up. I think this is generally correct. I mean, you can say advocate maybe goes, I don't know, fuck it, I don't know. You can move things around, but generally speaking, this is an increase in responsibility, right? I think so. This one I like, although this looks like the Kyrgyzstan flag, so I want to see if I can maybe modify that. For people who don't know that, that's it's a far right symbol. So it looks kind of like this thing. Yeah. As you can see. Let's go back to it. Right there. So I don't want to reference the Kyrgyzstan flag. I think it's fine. I mean, there's only so many reasonable shapes. Let's see. What else? Oh, yeah, this is a new edition. This does say include Linux. I really wish I could get like the word web server and the word Linux in here tighter. But I don't know. I mean, it's in a ballroom, and I don't know how big this is actually going to be. Right now, this is taking up like the size of my hand or so. Oh, there's also something else that I have had for a while that I'm going to actually be doing. And I should probably integrate it into my talks. Let me go get it real quick. Hold on. Be right back. So I guess I should be practicing with this tool and not be using my mouse cursor. This is a very cheap presentation tool I got from Amazon, and it has a laser pointer on it. Is it going? Oh, I have to turn it on. Yeah, I have to turn it on. So there's the laser pointer, right? And then it has these buttons up here that totally work in Linux, and it just goes back and forward through the slide deck. It just sends like a keyboard commands, and you plug it in like you'd plug in a wireless keyboard with this little USB dongle. So it's actually really cool. It tests it at a distance, and yeah, so I can just sort of like, so this is what I'm going to be using when I'm doing the presentation. It's nice. So I should be using that for some of this. So I think I'm going to be doing that from there on out. Also, when I'm talking about the 12 360K floppies, I actually have a prop of 12 360K floppies, right? And I can say, look at all the work here. Like you'd have to do all of this installation, and then I have a 32 gigabyte micro USB to compare it with. So those are some props that I'd like to use just for fun. But if I'm going to be doing this and really worried about the timing, I need to use those props as to see if I, to make sure that this thing works and I can get it done in an hour. Let's see. There's also, I talked about Kill Your Darlings, and I've killed some slides. This one, I mean, I guess the nice thing about this is that the content of the slides, I think, stand independently. And that even if you don't have the 23-page script, this is still a really fun presentation. And there's all these little small things in here. Slow and fragile, busy signal, too awesome, SCO Xenix. I don't even go over shit like this, but it does affect. Oh, I updated this. So one of my issues was that although we show, well, first of all, this now is better respective of Bell's law. And my other issue was that you could see that the mainframe price was between here and here, but it really didn't express the heyday of mainframes here, or the velocity, or, how big it was as a computing class. And by the time this part of, in fact, that's still too generous for mini computers. It kind of died in the mid 80s. But the whole point is that this is supposed to, workstations really didn't pick up until the 80s, and microcomputers, yeah, late 70s, and then it went super strong. Workstations were always a little bit less, So it's trying to get that in there. And if I really wanted to talk about magnitude differences, then mainframes would be like almost invisible, because the quantity of mainframes compared to microcomputers is just so small. We're talking about like one out of every, maybe, I don't know, 1 million computers or something is a mainframe. So this one, I do needs not desires. Doing beats planning. Maybe what I need to do is review these things, because this is leverage, don't invent. Doing beats planning. I mean, these all are designed to force user systems, and they are strongly motivated. Yeah, this is all the fucking curves, right? That all of those things are really. Where did the curves go? I don't even know the order of this thing anymore. I move stuff around so much. After that, I should kill that blue from that PCC thing and make it more white. It's price. Packets. What the fuck? Where's the curves? Did it just like delete itself? This one. So yeah, it's really these things, right? And it's also these. But I don't revisit that phrasing, which is kind of questionable, right? Like maybe what I need to do is change this so that the phrasing matches better. Let's see. I could probably get a screenshot for this one. Yeah, I think a screenshot here would actually be more aesthetically correct. So I can find what. For sure. For sure I can. Click that one. That was kind of funny. I like it. I like them both being there. So what did I just say I was going to do? Here's the problem is that, they just disappear into the ether. So let me do this over again. So it was, oh yeah, maybe not. But wait, Mr. McKenzie, there's more to it. Present two possibilities. Why is that? Did I misspell possibilities? Colon. Maybe not. Oh yeah. Pictorial evidence. And then pictorial evidence. Okay. I guess the I isn't pronounced. Then Unix. Oh, I missed a line there. Rephrase. Maybe. Well, also, there was that hourglass thing I started a couple nights ago. I decided not to do it at all. Was there anything else I was talking about? Oh, passive voice. Yeah. I mean, passive voice, it's more wordy, and you end up skipping beats, and so it's more poetic to not use it. Beyond people saying don't do that. I like to hide behind this thing. You can't see me now. Anyway, what are we at? We're at an hour 22. It's the longest one yet, but it's been productive. I guess that's it for tonight. Talk to you later. Bye.